go ahead and get started. Everyone, thank you all so much for joining. If you are looking for the first time, welcome. And if you've been here before, this is season number 2 of A Conversation Piece. And today, I want to start things off by reminding everyone of really the primary purpose of A Conversation Piece. And what it really is, what I intend to do is I want to create a space for people who have differing viewpoints or differing opinions to be able to share them so that we have broadened perspective. And this was birthed out of just what I see going on in our culture right now is that we are very much divided. And I believe that one of the ways that we can try to break through that is to begin to just talk to each other a little bit more and to remember that we're all human. And so I am so thrilled that my guests today have decided to come and be a part of this with me. And so I am going to take a moment to introduce them and give me a second. So I think I have changed it to where all 3 of us will be showing at the same time. And so first of all, I want to introduce, okay, Marie Fisher. Is it Marie? Okay, I just want to make sure I'm doing things right. And so Marie, first of all, the 3 of us, just in the process of doing this, the 3 of us are all from Memphis, and I know both of them and was connected to both of them. And then when we got started, we found out that they actually know each other as well. So I believe that we are just, it was meant to be. So I want to introduce you guys, give you a chance to introduce yourselves a little bit more if you want to, and then we will get started. And if you are viewing this and you have questions, please do post them. There's a little bit of a delay, so the earlier you post them, the better, but I will try to make stops along the way to address them. So Marie she hails from Memphis. She is currently the chair of the Maryland Republican Jewish Council, community liaison for JEXIT, spokesperson for Project 21, Black Leadership Network, and the previous second vice president for the Maryland Foundation of Republican Women. Ms. Fisher has been featured on The Hill, the Federalist, Politics. Am I saying that right? Yep. And other regional, national, and international publications. So thank you very much for being here, Marie.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And then Jennifer Less is from Memphis, Tennessee, and she with an extensive nonprofit background that includes work in education, policy, poverty and homelessness, and community development. She also is active on a volunteer basis with democratic politics and grassroots efforts to increase voter turnout in underrepresented communities. She currently serves on the board of Together We Will, an organization which focuses on electing Democrats to local and state offices in West Tennessee. So thank you both. And I will just say both of these women have just had an impression on me. Jennifer and I really met at the beginning of our careers, and I'm just so glad for social media that we are able to get back in touch. Maria and I went to the same high school, and we reconnected here on Facebook as well. And I chose them specifically because one of the reasons that it was kind of hard last year to find people for this show in particular is I wanted to choose people who are really clear in their convictions and their beliefs and perspectives, but also not dismissive. And that's the tone of the things that I see you post and say. And that's really one of the, the primary reasons that I look to you to kind of help me with a conversation piece. And so to get things started, for the benefit of people who are watching, just to let you guys know, I sent them both a couple of questions that they knew I was going to ask to get things started. And so the first one that I asked each of them was, if you could tell us 2 things in particular that you believe are the most important for our culture right now. And I don't have a preference. I can just pick at random to see who wants to go first. Somebody just jump in, but that was the first question. And then the second question, I'll hold off on that one. Let's talk through this one first. So does anyone want to go first, or do I just choose Jennifer, since you are at the top right now on the screen, and I'll just choose Marie next, and Marie, we'll reverse the next time.
Okie dokie, you got it. To me, it's kind of part and parcel of the same thing. And no, that's not true. It's really two different things. What I see is, first of all, a real increasing imbalance, and this has been going on continually and increasingly since the 80s, and really like more intensely since about 2010. And I see Democrats doing it as well as Republicans. However, I do think that it started in many ways with the rise of the Tea Party. And it's just a sort of a continuing polarization with means, with power, with financial power, and consequently with political power. And it's moving us away from democracy. And in that sense, the other thing that I see as a real problem is the erosion of democratic norms, of constitutional norms, of the rule of law. And, some political people and issues are symbolic of that, but I also see it as a kind of, I don't see it just emanating from there. I see people like really not educating themselves. And so they are speaking from sound bites and from without any sort of knowledge base behind it. And it's creating a situation where we may no longer be a monopoly, but we may be more like an oligarchy soon, generation, I think. And so that's problematic to me.
Can you give me like one example that stands out in your mind that's an example of the places where you feel like we're losing our democratic practices and rules of the law, just to have an idea?
Yes. So I have to say, like, this is connected to so many other issues for me. For me, like, really, Citizens United, election finance reform and lobbying finance reform are such tremendous issues. And so it behooves, for instance, politicians, members of Congress, to create this divisiveness, to take positions that are not conciliatory, because they're belonging to a certain agenda and they are appeasing certain groups of people that are larger donors. This is on both sides of the fence, honestly. But so then things happen that laws are passed that are not in the interest of the American people. That's the reason we've not done anything so far like we really should on the environment. It's the reason that we have things like, investigations of people that are more political witch hunts than with a, potentially with a basis in fact. So, I mean, honestly, January 6th is the kind of the culmination of that. And that was a really scary, dangerous thing that happened. There's nothing in my mind that stands out more than that. That was horrifying to me.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So Marie, the same question for you. How would you answer that question?
I answered the question. I think I said education.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about education, from what we're learning from schools. We just seem to have a lack of education in this country, where people, going back to what Jennifer says, people are repeating sound bites, they're repeating memes. No one's really researching. We have a society where no one researched. If it doesn't have 240 characters, people are not paying attention. We have extremely short attention spans. And, especially, I hate to say it, I love social media because it's brought me to meet so many people and brought us back together. But with the same, the same statement, it's made things, nobody looks, nobody researches, nobody, one thing I try to do when I post something, before I post it, I try to make sure it's real, factual. I'll look 50 million, I won't say 50 million, but I try to look in several places to make sure what I'm saying is right or correct, or at least have some research behind it instead of just spouting what everybody else spouts. And we have a very bad problem in this country, because on both sides, everybody's just repeating the same lines over and over and over. Nobody does any research. Half the people don't even understand what they're saying. If you were to talk to people one-on-one and say, do you understand what you're talking about? Can you give me some depth in that? And they can't. So there is a big lack of education across the line, children, adults. And I know I spoke to Jennifer about it, and Sharona, you can probably understand too. We all grew up in a very interesting education system in Memphis.
We did.
And the weirdest part, people wouldn't expect that. When I tell people about it, people are like, really? Memphis, Tennessee? And I'm like, yeah. And I look at my kids where they are, and I'm in Maryland, and Maryland's supposed to be like one of the top education states. And when I talk to them and I'm like, well, hey, are you guys reading this? Are you reading that? Are you doing this? They're like, no, we don't cover that. We don't talk about that. I'm like, and also goes back to what, Jennifer's saying, you're talking about Constitution and democracy, and also, they don't teach civics anymore. I remember both White Station Central, we had civic classes. Most schools don't have civics anymore. So how can you have adults understand what's going on in this country, truly going on, if you're not even educating children? If you ask children, you think about the Constitution, they can't tell you. And if you ask adults about the Constitution, they still can't tell you.
Yeah.
So in a way, it ties in what you're saying, Jennifer. We do have a major education problem, and social media, sound bites. Part of it, we have short attention spans, but nobody's trying to go deeper, to find out more, to find out history, to understand what happened. Everybody's just letting someone else tell them.
Can I follow up with a question to Marie? I think so. What I hear you saying is kind of two different issues. One is like the education system, the formal education system in school, and the other is people's willingness to educate themselves.
Right.
So I mean, by the way, I like completely agree with you. I mean, it drives me bananas, like when people just say things and they don't actually even know that it's true. They're just repeating. Especially, I mean, to me also, that is the danger of all the fake news stuff, because what's real, what's true, and what's not. If you cannot discriminate and discern, we got a big problem, because that kind of knowledge and that kind of civil discourse is the basis of democracy. And if we don't have it, we lose that. But I wanted to go back to education in school and find out more about what you think about that, because I have some thoughts too. And I want to hear more about where you're going with that.
Well, part of it, right now I live in Baltimore City, and Baltimore City is notorious, right? Like my daughter doesn't even go to school here. She homeschooled. Baltimore City, they spend per student approximately $14,000 to $15,000 per pupil. I think it's one of the third highest in the country. Unfortunately, in Baltimore City, you have schools that are not air conditioned. You have schools that are not heated. They will let kids out early in some schools because they don't have heat. And many people are asking, where is all this money going? And I know a lot of people say we need to throw more money at education. I'm like, yes and no. It reminds me a little, like, remember, I think it was like in the 90s, early 2000s, when people were getting rid of a lot of middle management and streamlining. I think we need to do that in education too. We have if you look, a lot of school systems are administrative heavy, and it's like, let's come off all the administrative heavy, take some of that money that we're paying and give it to teachers, give it to the classrooms, because that's where the money is really supposed to go. It's not supposed to go to, 50 million vice principals or intermediate. We need more teachers. We need very qualified teachers. I'm not saying all aren't and all are, but we need people who are there to teach. Not because, I've heard some people, they teach because that's all they could do. And it shouldn't be that way. You should have teachers, and I'm not saying all teachers. You have some great teachers out there, but even the great teachers, they're getting burnt out because they're expected to do everything from being a teacher, social worker, you name it. And that's going to be too much for the ones who really want to do this. And and at the end, who hurts? It's like the children are hurting, which means society is hurting.
Yep.
So I don't know if Maryland does like Tennessee does. We have like your school, like the amount of money that your school has access to funding is dependent on your local tax base. So schools that are in poorer neighborhoods have less resources than schools that are in wealthier neighborhoods, which to me is not the opposite of how it should be, but in a way, yes, because schools that are starting from a place that are farther behind need more resources to get caught up. Is a system like that also in Maryland?
Yes and no. In Maryland, it still goes along that line, but if you have, for example, here in Maryland, we know the whole state pays into Baltimore.
Okay.
So for whatever there might be a shortfall budget-wise, then the other parts of the states will contribute into that. So in a way, it is on all of Marylanders. So, we hear people in Maryland who are upset because, you might have one, like my kids went to school, and when we first moved to Maryland, we were in Poolsville, and that was wonderful. Yes, it was a, upper middle income family, upper middle income area, but it, partially it was due to the funding, but it also was due to the school system and the teachers and then you have whatever Baltimore, the shortfall, that's where everybody else pays into. So at the end of the day.
So I wanted to make sure though, I know you said education, and I don't want to miss though what was the other most important thing. And Jennifer, I know that you spoke about January 6th, but I want to make sure that we're talking about the top two things as well, and we can circle back here because I have a method. There's a method to my madness, right? First, let's get it out there, and then let's see what our ideas are about making it better. But I do want to talk about okay, what was the second thing that you had that's really important to you? Because we could really literally spend the whole hour talking about just one, but I'm just curious about that, about the second thing for you.
I'm trying to remember what I wrote. I'm pretty sure it was like civil discourse. You might have to remind me.
Yeah, what you sent me was that you were concerned that people were that the government does like a one-size-fits-all for people. You listed here, I'm sorry, just give me a second. I have all these devices going on, but I want to be accurate. And so the second thing that you said was that, we're watching as the government tries to take control of all aspects of our lives, which is not a good thing at all. Too many times when government does so, it's a one-size-fits-all, and we know that's not possible. And, when you sent that to me, I'll just say, it really made me stop and think about some of the things that I've just kind of accepted, just some of those things. But anyway, that's what you sent. And I know that as things happen on the dime, and what was important, it changes. So I just wanted to make sure we covered that and get more of that aspect for that one too.
Well, I first realized that actually early on when I was about 17 or 18, when I was applying for colleges and financial aid, and they were saying, oh, well, your family can afford to pay this much money. No matter, they looked at everything, and it's just like, in reality, my parents can't pay that much money. And, we're coming from Tennessee, and then here I was going to college in New York. And so here's a much more expensive area to live in, more expensive school. And so you're saying I should be able to pay this much, but it's like, you're not looking people individual. You're looking at number crunching and just say, okay, this is what you can do. But I also see that in so many areas of the government where, for example, what someone does in Maryland and what someone does in Tennessee and what someone does in Washington, these are all completely different states. Yes, you still have, people are people, but when you take in everything from the demographics to landscape to, crime to, when you add all that together, states are still different. And then when everybody does things from DC, looking at the rest of the country, it's like, sometimes you feel they are so out of touch. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. I feel so much people are out of touch. And that's when you end up with governments saying, okay, we'll do this for the country. And this is what everybody will get. And it's like, that doesn't work. And I even look back at, poverty issues. I remember when they started the war on poverty in the 60s. And then the federal government decided, we're going to do this, do that, do this. And they thought certain families were poor. Yes, maybe by a New York or a DC standard, a family was poor. But if you have a farmer who might be only making, all right, say in 1960 terms, $5,000 a year. He's bringing in $5,000 a year, but he has a farm and he has cattle. He has fruits and vegetables. He has, dairy. He can feed his family. Well, even though he's only bringing in $5,000 cash, he's feeding his family. But if we looked at it from I almost say bean counter point of view, he's poor. But in reality, he might not be. He might be wealthier than you and I at the end of the day because he can feed his family. He owns his house. His taxes are low.
Got you.
I got to interrupt and ask a question. So the alternative is for the government to do nothing and just let people be poor.
I'm not saying the government to do nothing, but don't do a one size fit all. You need to.
But you have 300 million people living in this country. How can you do I'm going to individually deal with this one person and look at the totality of the circumstances. I mean, I think that governments try to do the best they can. And I agree that it's impossible for governments to really tailor solutions to very small, specific communities at times. But at the same time, we have this idea that's we consent to be governed, right? We elect our leaders and we consent to be governed. And by the way, this is where I think the whole Citizens United and lobbying comes in, because the interests of the American people are hijacked by special interests and by people with more political resources and power. But there are certain things that cannot be supplied in the private marketplace. They're public goods and services. They're the fire department. There are, parks that can only be supplied. I mean, realistically, it's not cost effective to do it in the free market. And so we have there is a role for government to play, but with 300 million people, 330 million people in the country, unless you want to even be in more debt and spend even more money than we already are spending, how do you deal with people who are really in need and yet, the fact that it's a one size fits all? I mean, is it better to have one size fits none? We're not doing this, or is it better to just no, some people are going to slip through the cracks and they're going to get advantages that it's a bummer they got advantages, because right now there are already people who have outsized advantages, and it's primarily wealthy people.
So I want to, I'm glad you asked that, because what I'm interested in is your ideas. What I hear both of you saying is that, we're acknowledging that, our government does do a one size fits all. And sometimes that doesn't really match up with everybody in the country. But that is the consummate question then is, well, what is it? How do we serve? Is it that we focus on serving the bulk of the people in the country, or, just the majority of the people in the country? Or how is it that we could possibly go about maybe thinking about how we can, how we can serve those? Because you're right, like it's I don't know if you were implying that we don't do anything. I don't think that was the case, but I do want to tap into that because you both make very stark points about how, I clearly understand what you're both saying. One, saying somebody fits into a category that they don't necessarily do versus, and responding to that versus not responding at all. Like, I don't know what the answer is. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that, how we can, move forward to something that would work maybe better than it does now.
Well, I think the federal government needs to work more with states to get a
Mhm.
better idea of what people need in there. Because a lot of times I'm just, like I said, there's still, you're getting too many people who are just so out of touch.
Mhm.
And I hate to say it, we as American people, that's also part of our fault. And the
Mhm.
reason why I say that, um, I've had a chance to watch elections. I even actually worked as, what do they call it, county tech, where I work in IT. So part of my job one year was to work on the voting machines, set them up, get them set and ready. And I haven't seen this, I only saw this in one place, which I thought was how it should be. I did an election in Benton County, Mississippi, and it was the most interesting thing. And I'm thinking, this is how elections really should be.
Mhm.
There were people who turned out like no tomorrow for their local election. Like I remember sitting at that courthouse till 3 in the morning I was the only person who ran all the machines and helped tabulate all the votes.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I was there till 3 in the morning, making sure everything was right, to make sure every vote was counted. And these people were all sitting here. And I was like so surprised. I'm like, why are you guys still here? And they're like, because these are our friends, these are our neighbors. This is what matters to us. This is our town. And it was a small town in Mississippi that
Mhm.
was very interesting, very diverse, but everybody still saw each other as part of the small town. And then as each election went on, from their local to their state and it was a presidential primary, I think it was, 2008, they
Mhm.
were smaller and smaller, which that isn't good either, but
Mhm.
they cared so much about their local government because they knew that's
Mhm.
what affected them the most.
Mhm. Mhm.
While when I look at numbers here, like for example, Maryland, we are pulling teeth sometimes to get people to come out for municipal elections. We
Mhm.
had an election, I can't remember which town it was. When they first ran for the mayor election, there are a total of 500 eligible voters. 6 people turned out to vote,
Mhm.
only 6. And it was 3 and 3. So they had to go to they had to go to a runoff.
Oh
And
gosh. Okay.
runoff because the various parties, got involved and pushed people to come out. I think the person won, but only by 10 or 15 votes.
Mhm.
So
Got
it's
you.
such a small amount. But presidential elections, everybody comes out.
Yeah.
Congressional, but then people forget about your Board of Education,
Yeah.
your county council,
Yeah.
your small, and those are the ones you really need to work on, to elect, because those are people that'll be easier for you to go talk to, reach out to, call them up, especially smaller towns.
Mhm.
Then, how often are you going to be able to reach out and talk to your congressman, or unless, like Jennifer says, you're someone with money, power, influence. But your average person, they're not going to be able to reach out to them.
Mhm.
And so that's why I
Mhm.
said, I know we have to help as many people as we can, but I just feel like the further people are away from it, the
Mhm.
more they figure let's just do one size fits all. But there needs to be more work with states, with
Mhm.
municipalities. So
Mhm.
we know what's going on. So people can get the resources to the right places instead of, like you said, special interests, um, porks and bill, a lot of pork and bill, like there is there's a huge customs office in West Virginia. And I asked somebody, why is that there? And they said, well, because at the time a certain bill went through, Robert Byrd was one of the most powerful congressmen. So he got a customs bill for West Virginia. And there is a
Mhm.
customs office in West Virginia. And
Mhm.
it's just like, you don't have many people coming through customs in West Virginia.
But I have I have a comment, and then I want to make sure, Jennifer, I think you had a response to that. But I think do you think you would have been able to make these distinctions if you hadn't gotten involved in elections?
Well, yeah, just because, well, I mean, because I worked at this before I was even political. This was just me
Got you.
working
Or
in
just a part
IT.
of your, got you.
Yeah.
Got you. So Jennifer, did you have a response or an idea or, comment to
I
that?
have like so many things. I hope I can like remember. I mean, I'm just going to say this. First of all, I hear what you're saying about states, and I agree with you that local elections impact your life in some ways much more than national elections. And it goes back to that idea that we were talking about, that people don't educate themselves. They don't know who the candidates are. They remember the signs they saw, and that's who they choose if they vote at all.
Or a familiar name.
And that's a problem. However, I'm just going to give you this like scenario. I am a Jewish Democrat living in Tennessee, where our state legislature and our governor are like, to me, sometimes like I don't even like, they're from another planet in some ways. Like they want to ban books, and they want to not expand Medicare when the money is basically free and being given to them to do it. They want to, I mean, they're somewhat punitive towards Memphis because it's majority, it's a poor majority Black community, rather than, the white rural, which is what, representationally what most of the legislature comprises. And so this operates this idea of like, you can't do what you want and you can't get what you want because the government is too big and they're going against your interests at every level. I mean, it's not just a national government.
Right.
And so like sometimes I think to myself, like this, like a particularly crazy bill will pass in our state legislature, and I'll go, that's it, I'm moving, like, not really, but it's that against my values, right? And so I'm going back to this idea because I really remember learning about it in graduate school, and it's John Locke. And it's a social contract, right? And it's this idea that we all participate in the democracy, in the government. And when we do that, we get to choose our representatives, we get to choose who serves our interests. And in exchange for being a part of that community, we also give up certain freedoms and certain interests that are personal interests to create a functional society or community to be. So we have to like the civil discourse now, it's so shot and it's so divisive, and politicians on both sides of the aisle foment that divisiveness because it's good for their campaigns. But what we really need to be doing, like, as opposed to like the government can't do this or the government can't do that or the government's doing this, the government's not doing that, is that we all need to be like looking out for our communal interests. And I don't think that we do that in a way that's effective anymore. And so I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, but I think the locus of the problem for me is just slightly different than it is for you.
But I want to point something out to the audience, and just something out that I'm listening for, right? There's 3 different perspectives here, and it's so interesting to me that when I ask, like, what's the most important thing for you, like, neither one of you brought up what we're bombarded with on a daily basis from, in any kind of news medium, whatever's coming across our feeds, whatever we're seeing on the news. And so that is what I really hope that the audience pays attention to, because when my goal is to help with this civil discourse that I think does need to happen. We can have civil conversations full of peace if we just make time to do it. And that's really what this is all about. So we're coming at this with all different kinds of perspectives. But I think the other thing I want to point out is that I was very interested to see that and speak to how I think our values, like you just mentioned, like the value that Marie brought up, is something that we have in common. Like we can see where the other person is coming from, but the execution of those values is what is vastly different. And what I see our culture doing is holding on to those executions, like those very specific things and how people pursue those values. And they use that as a gauge for how they're going to interact. And I'm doing my best to say, wait a minute, I'm not trying to negate that specific outcome. What I'm saying is, can we take a little time and look at it and see, can we get to the value? What is the specific value that is in play here? And how does that inform my response? So I just kind of wanted to throw that in there. But yes, Jennifer, were you going to say something?
Yeah, and I actually think, I mean, it's really interesting because in some ways, Marie and I probably have like very like polar opposite views on things, but we are agreeing about a lot here.
Right.
Exactly.
It's kind of the
Exactly.
point.
It is the point. And the other thing that when I tried to have this show last year, it couldn't happen. Just the people who are Democratic leaning were the ones who showed up, right? But you're making a point that I discovered in my research and preparing for that is I really started to look at it. I'm like, well, I want to try to represent because I have conservative values. My voting record isn't always in what people think is the conservative. I mean, I voted for Bush and Obama, and so it's like I'm paying attention to, I have my own way that I do things. But I was doing research on trying to capture the current conservative vibe last year when we tried to do this. And what I read up on, it was an article written about people in rural America and what it was that they were saying that they didn't feel that caused them to vote for Trump. Some of them had voted for Obama and then they voted for Trump. And there was a lot of talk about how they said, I don't feel like my values are represented in the Democratic agenda. I don't even understand a lot of the Democratic agenda. Nobody's come out to talk to me about that, and I'm not included. And I thought about how, especially as a Black woman in business in corporate America, it's like, wow, like we have so much in common. In fact, I was so impressed by J.D. Vance's book. I actually read the book and not the movie, Hillbilly Elegy, that I had a book club about it. But I was like, the thing that was so striking to me is that this now Republican Senator Kent, he wasn't at the time. Yeah. He could have been my cousin. He could have been people in my family. That book was so capturing. Now, I don't care for his politics right now. Like he kind of changed and turned a corner, but we have so much in common. And somehow the way we resolve it has spun us into these places that I think that we have to really be careful, because we still might come out and have different outcomes, right? But like you said, we have so much in common, and that I want this to be as popular as whatever else comes out within this, so that people really can see us coming together this way, right? So anyway, I just wanted to highlight that. I want to make sure I don't overtalk my guests.
Well, I think it goes back, like what Jennifer says, you have the politicians that are spinning us. You have the media that's spinning us, because they all get their power. They all get their whatever from the division. Division makes news. Doesn't matter where it's Fox or if it's CNN, division makes news. Politicians get their power because we're divided. And I saw one candidate, he was out of Florida, and when I read I can't remember his name right now, but when I read what he was about, I was just like, I twisted my head, because a lot of what he was saying was more conservative than, than the current, Democrat. And one of the things he said, I'm like, oh my gosh, I agree with that. He says, we need to take the letters off the ballots. Don't let people see whether it's a Democrat or it's a Republican. Make people research. about the candidate
Mm-hmm.
instead of just, and I mean, I know what's going to happen today. You're still going to have people who are just going to pick names because
Yeah.
whether it's a D or R, even if it's not there, they're just going to look, oh, that name looks nice.
Yeah.
But we do need to get to a point where people really need to research
Yeah.
the candidate, who they are.
Yeah.
Like I tell people, like you, Sharonda, I voted all over the spectrum.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
never voted for Bush. Never voted for Bush, never voted for Obama. But at the same time, I voted a lot of times independent candidates.
Mm-hmm.
In 2016, I voted for Johnson
Mm-hmm.
because I just felt at the time, no, neither one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
too many people don't. They just look to one or the other. They hear what the media tells them or their friends tell them, and no one really researches
Right.
and see what people are about. And sometimes they make it hard. They
Yeah.
do make it hard.
Yeah. Now I mean, I told you guys, I think as we were prepping, the hour goes so quickly. But like the other thing that I asked, and we don't have to go deep here, but I do think just in light of the fact that it's about a year after the presidential election, and we did have a lot related to that, but I thought it was really important. And I'll tell you why. I wanted to ask, what do you think? And I think I put it in the context of a conservative or liberal, but what I really want to know is just you, period, right? What do you think the other major party misses about either what you're looking at to make a decision about who to vote for, or what's speaking to, what your candidate or your party that you're voting for captured that the other party doesn't. And I ask that because I do remember that, somebody I was talking to, I would always hear people say when folks would bring up that classic argument about just Donald Trump being staunch and his personality and all of those things. But one person was like, did you actually look at the video of what he said in the wake of George Floyd? And, I hadn't, right? And I went to Twitter and I found that video, and it was like another person. And I was thinking, that person is like someone unlike any image of Trump that I had ever seen. And I was really very surprised by it. And I was like wondering about that. Likewise with when I did the same thing when people would come to me with their arguments about Joe Biden. And I actually paid attention to and looked at what the things that are important to me, just a certain resiliency about him that is really important to me, that it just helped me to solidify my framing and my thinking about it. But I don't know that either of the parties really captured either of that. Do you know what I'm saying? And that seems, it's like it was up to me, like you guys have said, to educate myself about what was really important to me, to make sure I was really clear about where I wanted to give my very precious vote. And so that's really where this question is birthed out of, because I am sure that anybody watching this will probably be surprised by what you have to say and will probably be able to relate to someone who's representing a party that they would think they wouldn't agree with. So I wanted to give you a little history about why I'm asking that question and really find your ideas about what is it that you think people miss about either the candidate or the party in general, what's being presented, and just leave it at that. But it's up to you how you answered that. I don't know. It was targeted for me, but I don't know how that translates for you guys.
Marie can take this one first.
Was it too much? I'm sorry.
I didn't write back, the answer to that because
Okay.
I think it's layered.
Oh, yes. Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? You think it's what?
It's layered. Like
Okay.
it's not only is what the other side thinks of conservatives,
Mm-hmm.
but people who think themselves as being conservatives, what is conservatism? And there are a lot of people who might get in trouble for this, but I don't care. There are a lot of people I call Trumplicans.
Mm-hmm.
They were, they became Republicans because of Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw Trump as a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
But when you looked at a lot of his policies, a lot of his policies were not traditional conservative policies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, first of all, we wouldn't do tariffs. Conservatives, most conservatives never did tariffs. True conservatives, not, that, because true conservatives believe in free market. And when you put a tariff, when you're saying, I'm going to, that's not a conservative principle. A lot of things he did a lot of spending. That's not a conservative principle. We try to, he never, I don't know, people are probably pissed at me for saying this, but there was no budget. Well, no one did a budget. No one's done a budget in about, oh gosh, maybe 15, 20 years. And that goes on both sides. But either way, that's, I think conservatives, I consider myself an old-fashioned conservative, even though I never said I was a Republican for a long time or Democrat. I went back and forth. I was independent for a lot of years. When people ask me what kind of Republican you are, I tell people I'm a Kemp Republican. And when people are like, who? And it's just like, then you have to sit there and try to explain who John Kemp was, what he was about. And most people have no idea because he wasn't this big, flashy, smooth talking politician. And unfortunately, that's probably why he didn't ever, get to be a presidential nominee or, he ran, but he never got to be the party's nominee. And a lot of people think, but from the outside, some people think conservatives are heartless, cold. They don't care about other people. I remember growing up, I used to hear from my mom, she would say, Republicans only care about big business. Here's the irony of it all. My dad was a lifelong Republican. My mother is now a Republican. But the interesting part, when I became more conservative, more Republican, I met more people who at some point in their life had either been on food stamps, welfare, homeless, struggled with God knows what, abuse. I never met so many people like that until I became like Republican and conservative. So a lot of people have this idea of conservatives and Republicans are the silver spoon, and I'm like, no. Unfortunately, that's what we see in the media, and that's what we see in our politicians. But your average grassroots, that's not, like you said, hillbilly elegy. That's
really, that book is profound. It really is profound. When you say John Kemp, was there something about him that stands out? Like, what was the two things, or what was it about him that stood out? His stance on things, his.
He wasn't trying to pander to specific, like, special interests, or he was really, he came from average means. He was trying to help the American people. And I've since had a chance. I never got to meet him, but I did get to meet his son. And his son does a lot of work in minority communities. He does, it's still conservative values, but he tries to bring it to minority communities and helping them create wealth. And a lot of people don't get it. It's not just about a job, it's about creating wealth so you could pass this on to generation to generation. So a lot of people, that's what I think a lot of people get. They just still see conservatives as, or like a lot of friends might say, oh, they still see it as a party of white, wealthy men. I would say white, wealthy, straight men. Yet my immediate circle is filled with conservatives who are Black or white, straight, gay, transgender, and all of us are just like, we just want the freedom to be us at the end of the day, whatever that is.
Got you. Well, thank you for that. So Jennifer, how would you, what comes to mind when I ask that question?
Well, before I answer that, can I kind of like just respond to Marie's a little bit?
Yes, absolutely.
So I think that there's a point that you make that I really agree with, and it is very true, which is that the terms liberal and conservative have become meaningless because they're not liberal. Liberal is not liberal and conservative is not conservative anymore. I mean, it makes me, and a conservative is not the same thing as a Republican anymore, and a liberal is not the same thing as a Democrat anymore.
Right.
And it makes me bonkers when I see, a Republican Congress one minute they're all like, don't spend, don't, welfare is, blah, 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 whatever. And then they turn around and they, do a tax cut for corporations that puts, makes the deficit balloon. And on the other hand, it makes me crazy when I see people who profess to be liberals and Democrats, trying to censor people in the name of inclusiveness. Don't say that, don't, so those terms are now meaningless to me. You're not
I got you. That's good. That's a good point to make. Yeah.
But, and I also think that, I just lost my train of thought. I mean, that was the main thing that I wanted to say about that. But the other thing is, I do think that you are in a minority if your group of conservatives and Republican is as diverse as the one you described. And I think it's awesome that it is. But you have, like, what traditional, I mean, I think when you say traditional Republican, I think like Paul Ryan or John McCain.
Got you. Yeah.
I think like, like you said, small government, like fiscal conservatism, all those kinds of things, state focus on states' right. But also, and I'll say, I'm not just saying Republicans, also Democrats. It's just that the most recent, congressional term was a Republican Congress. And so that was on my mind. But I also think that you have to look at what a party has become. Like, what they are right now is what they are.
Yeah.
And so the Democrats now, like, even despite being like what we have historically thought of as liberal and everybody, Nazis can be Nazis because we have to have freedom of speech and things like that. They're not that anymore. They are what they are now. And Republicans, same, they are what they are now. And unfortunately to me, and I don't say this to knock you or your position or anything, I see a lot of racism in the Republican Party. And I see Republican politicians feeding bigotry and feeding grievance to galvanize their voter base, who are rightfully aggrieved, but who are being, in some ways, to me, manipulated by politicians on either side of the aisle. It's not just Republicans, but I struggle with, and I don't think that individual people are necessarily racist, but I struggle with that sort of motif, underlying message, whatever I want to say, that I see cropping up, dog whistles. I do see that. I see it on both sides, but I see it more, with the Palestinian-Israeli thing on the Democratic side, but I do see it, and it frustrates me with the Republican Party. I have to say that.
See, I find that interesting. I have gotten more racist quips at me from Democrats.
Really?
Straight out. Because I don't fit what they expect, which I think is wrong. You shouldn't lash out at people like, if I met someone and you don't fit what I expect, it's like, fine, that's what you are. But I've had people say to me, oh, you must not be educated, or you don't know better.
Yeah, as if you can't be looking at the same information and come away with a different idea about the information. So yeah, I get that a lot too, probably in different scenarios, where it's like you're not looking at it right.
No,
you don't understand it.
I had a guy actually say that to me. I was at a fair and I was working for the gentleman. He was Jewish. He was running for attorney general, and this guy said, "Oh, you must not be educated," because I worked for this guy.
Wow.
And I was just like, "Are you serious? You said that to me?" And I've had, I wrote an article about it, how, when we're conservative and we're whatever, Black, Jewish, what comes at us is so nasty. And so, I have friends who are Black and Republicans, their inbox, I mean, thank God I have it. I don't know why I don't get it. Maybe because I'm not as divisive, I'm not as polarizing, but their inbox is like, wow. It is just nasty.
I think that that is a problem all across that country, and it comes back to the original problem that we were talking about, which is that people are ugly to people who they disagree with, regardless of race. I mean, they just are, and I hate that. Like, it drives me bananas that people are like that instead of just being like, what do we have in common, you know? But what I do is I see what I see some of is policy, actual policy that is weighted against groups with less political power, which are historically tend to be minority groups. And I'm not saying they always are, but you know, poor white people too, honestly. But you know, in Tennessee, the example, not expanding Medicare, you know, when it's money from the government that you don't have to pay out of your pocket, things like that. That's going to disproportionately affect people in poverty. It's going to not Medicare, I said Medicaid. That's what I mean. Disproportionately affect people in poverty, disproportionately affect minority communities. And that's the kind of thing. And it a lot of times that, to me, can sometimes be manipulated and used to be a sort of a dog whistle. I've seen politicians who are Republican and they call themselves Republican, and they have nothing to do with what I think of as traditionally the Republican Party. They're the people that are kind of over the top, Trump acolytes that are using that, you know, and that bothers me, not just because like it makes me mad at the politicians, but because there are people who suffer for that. You know, there are people who are affected by that. And that troubles me a lot, that they are looking for political leverage and political gain at the expense of real people that they're supposed to be representing. So that's my issue with that. But I hear you. I'm sure that you have gotten ugly things from Democrats. I don't doubt that one bit. Everybody's ugly on both sides of the case. You know,
and I mean, I think it goes both ways when you're saying about, you know, and that's the issue. Most people don't know the difference between politics and policy.
Yeah.
And that's a major issue because I've, you know, after dealing everything, I told people, I said, I'd rather work in policy than politics because then I can feel like I can get something done. Maybe, but and it goes both ways. Like I look at, you know, I know the environment is very important, but then I look at what they do in places like West Virginia, where, you know, during certain administrations, they try to get rid of coal immediately instead of scaling it back, slowly scaling it back, giving people the chance to learn new skills. Instead, they just cut things off. Then these people no longer have jobs. And coal miners, people think of, you know, white, it's white and blacks. Yes, it's predominantly white, but it's both. So now all these people, they don't have skills, they don't have jobs. And if people don't realize the correlation, if you look at where all the coal miners were, and during, you know, 2000s to maybe 2015, 16, when they were getting rid of all the coal mines, that was also the same area where you saw the big opioid addiction really take place.
But I think that there are ways to handle that address that issue without keeping the coal mines open, because that's dangerous to everybody. You know,
right. I mean, just do it in a slow way. Don't do this. You know, like you said, a lot of times they do stuff as to attract their base, saying, oh, this is what I'm doing, instead of, okay, let's do this slowly, carefully, so we can fix one problem and not create another. And unfortunately, too many politicians, they, instead of fixing one and not creating another, they just figure, let's, you know, we'll get rid of one problem, but guess what? You just sprouted up 5 more by what you did.
They kick the can down the road, basically.
Well, I am so excited about tonight. I mean, it's already been an hour, but what you have done is really represent what I had in mind and kind of proven what I hoped would be the case. You know, there's you can imagine there's all kinds of, are you sure you want to do this? Why do you want to try and do this right now? And it's like, because I believe in us and I believe that we can have civil conversations, and that sometimes they don't look anything like what you can predict, and nothing like what media has in our faces all the time.
Mhm.
And I just really applaud you and thank you so much for coming and sharing your ideas. Before we wrap things up, I want to kind of finish things off by asking what I've been taking notes. So what I hear that we're all in agreement about is that self-education is a missing, and education for our schools. Like there are things that we need to work out there. The idea, the information about local government and the federal government working more with the local government, kind of to help address the vast differences that are going on in different states. But also be mindful and aware of when that there are people, with the dog whistles saying one thing and doing another, just however we can increase our awareness about those things. But I guess my question for both of you is, for example, let's just talk about education and self-education. What is one thing, or what are your ideas about any topic that struck a nerve tonight that you would be interested maybe in doing and trying to bridge the gap? Like, I know, like, we got this platform, but like, is there one thing that came out of tonight that, or that, can you hear me, Jennifer? Okay. Hello? I hope you can hear me okay. But is there, okay, is there one thing? It looks like her screen might have been a little Oh, there you are. You're moving now, Jennifer. I can see you. I don't know if you can hear me, but I can see you moving now. But is there one thing or one topic that was brought up?
You're breaking. Can you hear me?
Oh, I'm sorry. My internet is saying that it's fine. I'm going to text you my question. I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me, but Marie can hear me fine, right, Marie?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm going to text the question to you, but is there one thing that came out of tonight that you might, one way your perspective may have been broadened that you'll carry with you as you move on into the next thing that you're going to be working on, or as we go from here? Oh, you can hear me? Either one.
Are you asking me? Are you
Both
asking
of you. Both of you.
I think that there's a lot of, and I guess I sort of knew this in a theoretical sense, but I think it was really driven home for me that it's a lot of sound and fury politics,
Mm-hmm.
like when we get down to brass tacks, if we educate ourselves with responsible and accurate information, and we don't just look at like what the rhetoric is coming out of Congress or what Fox News says or what MSNBC says, and we actually like learn and understand issues in a fundamental and in-depth way, that there is a tremendous amount of common ground that can be breached. The problem is people just don't do that. So we yell at each other and we listen to, whatever's on Fox News or whatever's on MSNBC. But I think that there are some issues we're really far apart on, and politicians and, media and social media play on those things that we are in disagreement about, but they ignore the things that we are in agreement about. And there's quite a bit of that. If we really, when push comes to shove. And I think that that was just really driven home to me. I mean, I agreed with Marie on like 80% of what she said, So I think that's really important to keep in mind. And, it needs to be like, sort of like what you're doing, Ronnie. I mean, a movement to promote that, to say, screw the politicians, we're going to do this, what's best for our community and our society, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah, and I really want to drive home that we can have these conversations. They don't look like necessarily just the rhetoric that comes out of the news. And that it's amazing to see the grasp that has on people. It's amazing to see how it shapes a lot of people. But basically what you just said was what the, mission statement is that I've written for a conversation piece is let's get real people together to learn more about, all three of us grew up in the South. I hear that. I hear a lot of that in our responses here. But to me, on the, learning more about you right now, hearing how both of you have gotten involved in the political spectrum, whether it was, as an IT person and you kind of became more aware, or as you're more involved with certain organizations, it has really kind of helped me to see the importance of that for what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to, be considering that myself, but I really appreciate that. Thank you for noting that what I hoped to be the case really is true here. So but Marie, I want to make sure I give you time to answer that as well.
For me, I want to push more like policy. I want people to be aware of what's really going on, what bills going on. There are a few things I've been telling people. There's certain bills I'm like, this will affect you this way. And this has nothing to do with being Republican or Democrat. I said, this is going to affect the school system here, or this is, and people are just like, really? And I'm like, yeah. So part of it, I just want to bring issues, just plain issues to people, not a Republican issue or a Democrat or a conservative liberal. This is the issue.
Yeah.
And I just want to present it to people and just present it as is. No filter, no, without the squawking of NBC or Fox or anybody else, and that's one reason I've sort of moved away. And even though I'm still in charge of a group, we made it our mission, first and foremost, because we're Jewish, we said we're calling out anybody who's anti-Semitic, which sort of we catch from both sides. But, our goal is, this is our one goal. And I think if more people would take that on, instead of basing it off party.
Who's doing what, who's leading it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if groups of parents, I know some people think about that Virginia, but it's like, these were parents who were both sides who said, no, I think the only reason why is because you had a candidate who said, parents have no say in education. And that got parents mad.
Yeah.
Bottom line.
Yeah. But I think both of these,
I don't think that would have happened.
I think the presidential election and these midterms are really saying, very distinct that we want, being here in the middle is where we need our leaders to be. Like, I know that's heavily generalizing, but there's a reason why it's so tight. That's the world we live in today. And we cannot live in extremes. Like, even if it's an extreme that I agree with, or if it's something that I think is okay, like, I know that as far as creating a policy around it and trying to push things forward around it, it's not gonna work. We have to be considerate. The other thing I want to make sure I point out is that what I do hear from both of you is, that value of, education and knowledge, but also one of freedom and how we're pursuing that in different ways, and making the argument that what's in place a lot of times for people who are, who fall into categories that don't really fit what some of our policies are in place about, and having to work harder to achieve that certain kind of freedom. Like, that's a very real thing, but ultimately the value is to be free. And I think we also have to be conscious of freedom is a construct. Like, we still live here in this country with 300 million of us, but I believe we can do it. We can't do it the way that I think. I'm concerned about the way things are going. We keep saying that African passage, I believe, would be the change you want to see. I just really wanted to do my best to try and present a more, what I think, accurate picture of what it means to sit down and have a conversation with someone who, from what I've seen posted, right, our perspectives are largely different, but there's a lot of filtering that has to go in a post. But when we get together and meet like this, it's a beautiful thing. So thank you both so much. I'm looking, I know that people are watching, but also I don't see very many questions. And I think, if anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask them. I'll feed them to these guys even after the show. But thank you both so much for joining. I don't know if you had any parting thoughts to say. I believe you might have a website or a site. So how can people get in touch with you if they want to look you up, Miriam?
Well, I'm on Facebook. Well, actually, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter as Ebony Jewess.
Okay. All right. And then Jennifer, I think, are you here on Facebook or any?
I am on Facebook, but my settings are pretty private. So
Okay, I got you.
I'm a regular lady.
Well, thank you both so much for being on here. And I don't see any questions. Let me just make sure, actually, there are 4 comments now. Let me see if I can get to them. Just a second. Things get a little weird when I'm doing both of these several devices. So let me look at this one. So someone, the question that I did get was, there's someone who wrote, where is the racism in the GOP? And I don't know how deep you want to get into that question, but I would like it, Jennifer, if you just had, I believe he's referring to you bringing that up, but is there one example of where you see racism like that comes to mind, the first thing that comes to mind, an example of that you mentioned about just how, to kind of frame what you were speaking earlier about that?
Oh gosh. Well, look, I mean,
I could say one straight off. Paul Gosar.
Paul who?
Paul Gosar.
What can you give us a little? Can you give us a little history about that, or?
Well, recently, I know they said he did a couple of fundraisers with a guy who was considered alt-right. And I don't mean alt-right as in, but sort of a borderline neo-Nazi.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have major candidates who are like that, it's frustrating because there are a lot of us who believe that our party, should be a big tent. And then we have people like him who will stand out and do stuff. We're just like, oh. Another good example, I think the guy's name, can't remember his name, begins with a P. He's running for Senate in Ohio against another gentleman who's Jewish. And he made a comment saying, well, the most Christian GOP candidate is Jewish. And I'm just like, really? You said that? And it's like, that's not, so what? He has very, Judeo-Christian values, but you really said that? It shouldn't matter. It's about the values. Doesn't matter if he's Jewish, he's Christian, or what. He believes in these certain values. And if that fits, or if that's what people want, then fine. It shouldn't matter what his religion is.
I got you.
So,
I got you.
Yeah, you do have some racism. I admit there is racism there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that to me, Marie, is what is so refreshing about talking to you, is that I think, just if I'm gonna to touch on Trump, I don't think it's like taboo to talk about him or whatever, but I think when I would talk to people, one of the most heartbreaking things about him was there just seemed to be no accountability for his actions that leaned towards behavior that people labeled as racist, right? I do recognize that people are quick to put that label on folks, and did my best to just not try and, go there immediately. But I do think
to acknowledge reality.
Yeah, we do. And I think, I don't know, I do think that that's where a lot of the confusion is, like, just seemed like nobody checked him on stuff like that. But then again, now we're learning even more about him and his regime and what he had in place. But by that same token, I don't believe that everybody who voted for Trump was racist too. And I do, when people hold on to the policies that you just mentioned, like the policies that he had in place were very much representative of what I know the Republican base wants. So I can see how they were making a connection to the policies, but not to him. But it just seemed like there was no, in my estimation of things, it just seemed like there was no accountability there. But to hear you speak that very specifically about this question, it is relieving to see that we're not just ignoring that, that people aren't ignoring that, they see it too. And I'm just, that's a horrible label, and I'm not quick to put that on anyone. But so anyway, but Jennifer, did you have anything to add to that question or to that answer?
I don't think there's anything inherently racist about the GOP itself or the Republican values, like in terms of historical, like how Marie was talking about, like traditional conservative values versus what's going on now. But right. I think it's been hijacked by racists. I think the party has been hijacked by a number of racists. I think Madison Cawthorn is racist. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is racist. They're racist, and they are, and they're anti-Semitic, and they're there are a lot of things, but they are bigoted. And all of this alt-right stuff and all of the neo-Nazis cheering on Trump, like, if it would be one thing if like you said, if the Republican Party disavowed that and said, we're not going to do that. But like you said, there's no accountability for that. We'll take it. Go Trump, because he's getting us votes. He's, whatever. And so it's not the values of conservatism,
right,
the problem.
Right.
It's the people who have infiltrated the Republican Party right now, unfortunately.
It also goes both ways, because we look at, as the Democrats, yes, I know, there are a lot of us who love Tulsi Gabbard, but then people look at AOC and Ilhan Omar and Sheila Tlaib, and you're just like, and it's like, when you look at both sides, they say the squeakiest wheel get the most oil, so they get the most attention.
Yeah.
And that's how we all describe each party, because the media, that sells.
I think that some of them that you're talking about, I think that some of them are anti-Semitic for sure.
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to disagree with that. It makes me uncomfortable. It does. But what I was talking about before, like historically, I think the Democratic Party is about 5 to 10 years behind the Republican Party in terms of devolving into like something that is policy focused versus something that is, more fringe and extremist. Huh?
It's like they're all running off of media hype. Almost.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the Republicans, it started in 2010 with the Tea Party and Sarah Palin and all those guys. And I think that the squad is our Sarah Palin. I really do. And I think we're right behind you, unfortunately.
So we just see disparaging things really on both sides. And, with our culture largely being, these two parties, kind of the ones that garner and galvanize people to get the most votes, it really does become a matter of a lesser of the two evils. And so, or, it's hard to be passionate all the time, 100% passionate about things when that kind of leadership isn't checked, in my opinion. Yes, Jennifer.
Let me tell you this too, though. I mean, because I got to backtrack for a minute. There are policies that the squad or AOC or wherever promote that I am in full agreement with. But I do not like their tactics or their methods or their rhetoric. I don't like that. And I don't like how they, tweet things and they're give little sound. It's the same thing. And so, like, I'm sure that the Tea Party had some policies that some Republicans or many Republicans were like, Yeah, go. That's right. But we should not tolerate that kind of speaking to each other in our elected leaders. We should not, none of us,
And
you
see,
know.
the sad part about the whole Tea Party, when it originally started, it wasn't against, a lot of people think Tea Party started out as against, did everybody freeze? Oh, Sharonda froze.
Am I frozen? Am I okay? No,
for a second.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people thought the Tea Party was against Obama, and originally it came out in February because it wasn't against Obama. It was against what both Bush and Obama were doing when they were giving all this money to the banks, to the auto industry, to a lot of people were just getting frustrated because as people were losing their houses, they were watching all these big corporations get all this money from the government, and both administrations did it. So that's where the original Tea Parties met. And again, like, as we all know, everything gets hijacked, everything gets sidelined. So the original people, because I've met some of the original, they were Black, they were white, they were Asian, they were mixed because they were frustrated because government was giving all of our money to everybody, to all the companies and corporations, while people were losing their homes and losing their houses and losing their jobs. And people are like, well, where's our bailout? But again, much as we're seeing, a lot of stuff gets hijacked. And everything is so media focused instead of being, hey, how about American people focused?
Yeah.
But to answer the question where the racism is in the GOP, like there just is not, like there are plentiful examples, not of, like I said, not of, conservative policy itself, but of the people that are leading that, not that the party right now, unfortunately,
And we do see hints of it, I think, in both, hints of just
intolerance.
On both sides. And I think that plays more into why there isn't like a huge majority more than anything. I just think people, we might like someone's policies, but we don't like how they support something that's really just not something that's going to serve us all. And we do have to be accountable for those things. And I just believe that the more we get together like this, which this is really encouraging, the better we'll set an example for this is how we talk to people. And this is what I'm going to keep in mind when I move forward and I have to make some decisions. The whole intent of a conversation piece is not to try and persuade you to be some way that you're not. That's not who I am. That's not what this is. But it really is to broaden perspective. And I'm so thrilled because I really believe we've done that tonight. I really hope that, I know for me, just in preparing and getting here, I learned a lot. And I'm so grateful for this conversation. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for looking on and asking your questions. I am going to actually stop the stream right now. So thank you all so much. I'm working on the next episode where I hope to talk to people in the LGBTQIA and trans community, and again, have more of a conversation like this where we're actually talking to a person and not rhetoric. I really want to have that conversation. So you'll learn more about that when I get the information and get solidified on the guests. Please send me your feedback. Thank you so much for joining me. And we'll see you next time, everyone. Thank you.